The 16th of July, 1950. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. 200,000 people packed into the Maracanã Stadium, the largest crowd ever assembled to watch a football match in the history of the sport. They weren't nervous. They weren't anxious. They were celebrating. Brazil hadn't even kicked off yet, and the local newspaper had already printed the headline, "These are the world champions." The samba music was playing, the fireworks were ready, the champagne was cold. Brazil needed just 1 point. 1 single point. Against Uruguay, a tiny nation of 3 million people, a country so small it could fit inside the state of Sao Paulo twice over. This was supposed to be a formality. It was supposed to be a coronation. Instead, what happened in the next 90 minutes would become the single greatest trauma in the history of Brazilian football. A wound so deep, so raw, that Brazil wouldn't wear white shirts again for 40 years. And here's what nobody tells you. What happened that day wasn't just bad luck. To understand what was stolen from Brazil in 1950, you first need to understand what the World Cup meant to them. This wasn't just football. This was identity. Brazil had spent the previous decade transforming itself. The country was industrializing, urbanizing, modernizing. The 1950 World Cup was the first tournament held after World War II. Europe was still rebuilding from rubble. And FIFA, in a moment of confidence that now reads almost like prophecy, awarded the tournament to Brazil. They built the Maracanã specifically for it. At the time, it was the largest stadium on Earth, a concrete cathedral, a monument to ambition, and Brazil played like gods. In the group stages, they demolished Mexico 4-0, they beat Yugoslavia 2-0, they hammered Sweden 7-1, they crushed Spain 6-1. The football they played was electric samba on grass, players moving in patterns that seemed improvised but were devastatingly precise. The whole country stopped every time Brazil played, streets emptied, radios crackled in every corner of every city, children climbed trees outside stadiums just to hear the roar of the crowd. By the time they reached the final group stage, which functioned as the actual final, Brazil had scored 21 goals in 4 games. Uruguay had scraped through. The maths were simple. Brazil needed a draw. Uruguay needed a miracle. Nobody believed in miracles that day. Let's stop here for a second. Because before we get to the match, I need to tell you about a man named Obdulio Varela, Uruguay's captain. While the Brazilian newspapers were printing their premature headlines, while the Rio governor was preparing his victory speech, while 200,000 fans were singing in the stands before kickoff, Obdulio Varela walked into the Uruguayan dressing room, picked up every single Brazilian newspaper, and scattered them across the floor at his teammates' feet. He made them read the headlines. He made them look at the photos Brazilian players already celebrated as champions. He made them sit in silence with the weight of it. And then he said quietly, "The match is played on the pitch, not on paper." The game kicked off at 3 p.m. local time. The noise inside the Maracanã was not like noise you've ever experienced. Witnesses described it as a physical pressure, a wall of sound that you could feel in your chest. Journalists writing at pitchside said they couldn't hear each other speak from 2 feet away. Brazil attacked from the first whistle, fast, fluid, relentless. Uruguay were pinned back, barely holding on. The Uruguayan goalkeeper, Roque Maspoli, made save after save, diving left, punching right, throwing his body into shots that looked certain. The first half ended 0-0. Brazil continued to press. The fans grew louder, if that was even possible. And then 2 minutes into the second half, it happened. Friaça, Brazil's right winger, a low, drilled shot into the bottom corner. Goal. The Maracanã erupted. Fireworks went off inside the stadium. Supporters threw themselves from their seats. Journalists abandoned their notebooks. The Brazilian players ran to each other in scenes of absolute unbridled joy. Brazil were winning. 1 point. That's all they needed. The World Cup was theirs. What nobody in that stadium knew, what nobody could have known, was that they had just witnessed the peak moment, the very last second of innocence. Because from here, everything would fall apart. 66 minutes. That's when Obdulio Varela did something that had no tactical logic whatsoever. He picked up the ball after a contested Uruguay throw-in and simply walked away with it, slowly, deliberately, presenting it to the referee, arguing, gesturing, wasting time, killing the rhythm. And it worked. Not because of the time wasted, but because of what it did to the Brazilian players. It broke their tempo. It made them think instead of play. And thinking in football is where panic begins. 11 minutes later, 77th minute, Alcides Gigia, Uruguay's right winger, 23 years old, overlooked, underestimated. He received the ball on the right flank. He had done this same run twice already in the match. The first time he crossed, the second time he crossed again. Both times, nothing came of it. This time, he didn't cross. He shot into the near post. The Brazilian goalkeeper Barbosa, one of the greatest goalkeepers of his generation, dived to his right. He got his hands to it. It wasn't enough. The ball crossed the line. 2-1, Uruguay. And here is the moment that defines what this story is really about. The Maracanã 200,000 people went silent. Not quiet, silent. Complete, absolute, total silence. No booing, no screaming, no tears, not yet, just silence. The kind of silence that only happens when the human brain cannot process what the eyes have just seen. Journalists in the press box stopped writing. Commentators stopped commentating. The Brazilian players stood still, like statues, in the positions they'd been in when the ball crossed the line. One witness, a British journalist named Brian Glanville, who was there that day, wrote that the silence lasted nearly a full minute in a stadium with 200,000 people. 1 full minute of collective paralyzed silence. That silence has a name in Brazil. They call it O Maracanazo, the blow of the Maracanã. Uruguay held on. The final whistle blew. And then, only then, did the crying begin. Not just in the stadium, in living rooms across the country, in squares and streets and factories and schools, people who had gathered around radios collapsed. Men who had never cried in public wept openly on the street. In some cities, police were deployed not for violence, but because authorities feared a public mental health crisis. Brazil's head coach, Flavio Costa, was escorted out of the stadium by police for his own safety. The players hid in the dressing room for hours. And Moacir Barbosa, the goalkeeper, never recovered. For the rest of his life, Barbosa was blamed. By strangers, by neighbors, by the Brazilian Football Federation. He was never called up to the national team again. He was banned from visiting Brazilian training camps. He was treated for decades as the man who lost the World Cup. He died in 2000, at the age of 79, in poverty. His last recorded words about football were, "In Brazil, the maximum sentence for any crime is 30 years. I have been paying for 50. Take a moment with that. A man, a goalkeeper, who got his hands to a shot, who did everything a goalkeeper is supposed to do, who was punished for the rest of his natural life, not by law, not by logic, but by grief. By a nation that needed somewhere to put its pain. But here's where this story gets darker. Because in the years that followed, historians, journalists, and football analysts began to ask a question that nobody had dared ask before. Was Brazil's defeat the result of a tactical failure so catastrophic, so foreseeable, so completely avoidable that it amounted to something close to a betrayal? The evidence is uncomfortable. Brazil's coach had been warned by his own players that the formation was wrong. That playing so aggressively, so committed to attack, left them dangerously exposed on the flanks. The right flank, the exact flank Gigia exploited, twice before scoring. Both times the warning was there, both times nothing changed. The team selection had been controversial. Players who had performed brilliantly in earlier matches were dropped. No official explanation was given. And the pre-match ceremony, the public speeches, the music, The official photographs of the champions that was not organized by the fans. It was organized by the Brazilian Football Confederation, by the officials themselves, before the match had been played. The game wasn't stolen by Uruguay. It was handed to them, and this is what haunted Brazil for 50 years. Not the defeat itself. Defeats happen, even to great teams, even on the biggest stages. What haunted them was the suspicion never proven, never fully investigated, but never fully dismissed that the people in charge of Brazilian football in 1950 were so drunk on certainty, so intoxicated by the idea of victory, that they forgot to actually prepare for the possibility of losing. They celebrated before the battle. They printed the headlines before the final whistle. They built the monument before they had anything to put inside it. And Barbosa paid the price. Not the officials, not the coaches, not the federation president who organized the pre-match victory ceremony. The goalkeeper, the man who got his hands to it. Here's a final detail that almost nobody knows. In 1993, Barbosa attended a Brazilian national team training session. He wanted to watch, to see the new generation, to feel connected even at the end of his life to the game he had given everything to. He was turned away at the gate. An official, a junior federation employee, looked at him and said, "We don't allow people here who bring bad luck to Brazil." Barbosa turned around. He went home. He never attended another national team event. And Brazil, the country that built the largest football stadium on earth as a monument to its own greatness, never gave him so much as an apology. The 16th of July, 1950. 200,000 people walked into the Maracanã, expecting to witness a coronation. They witnessed a funeral instead. The World Cup was not lost by Barbosa's hands. It was lost by the arrogance of a federation that forgot the most basic rule of sport. Nothing is won before it is won. Brazil would go on to win 5 World Cups. They would produce Pelé, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Zico, Garrincha. They would give the world football so beautiful it made people cry. But in every one of those victories, and in every defeat, the ghost of the Maracanã was there, waiting. Because some wounds don't heal. They just get quieter. So here's what I want to know from you. Who do you think was really responsible for what happened in 1950, Barbosa, the coach, or the federation that celebrated too early? Leave your answer below, and if you think there's another forgotten football story that deserves to be told, tell me in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.